Hi everyone. So the last video we talked about variables, constants, vars, how to declare them, how to assign values to them, and using them in our code. This next topic covers one of the most important concepts in programming known as conditionals. And so what conditionals basically are is that for a lot of programs, you don't necessarily want to run every line of code. In fact, you often don't. When you think about a user interacting with a program, oftentimes you only want them to interact with certain sections of the code. So only certain sections should run when they take certain actions. And let's take a very basic example. And first we're going to write it out, and then we'll actually see it a bit in action. Let's think about the example of someone who's logged in or not. And you might say, oh, well, this is just a variable with false in it. Well, let's think about the real world situation. So is logged in as a variable false, and so you might think about, when do you want someone to log in? If I go to my bank account, which I have here, not my bank account, but my bank, then I could log into my online banking. Think about what I should see if I go to the website and what my variable would be set to. It would most likely be is logged in would be set to false, because I shouldn't immediately be able to log into a bank account without authentication, right? And so when you arrive on a web page, it's often the case, unless there's something in the background, that you won't be logged in, and you don't want the user to be able to interact with your application until they log in. You don't want a user to be able to mess with accounts in your bank unless they're able to log in successfully and prove that they are the right person to be messing with said bank account. So this is a variable, and how we might use this is something like, so we would have a conditional that would read this variable. And so in 99% of programming languages, when someone says conditional, the implementation of that is a if statement. Java, C++, JavaScript, Ruby, Python, there might be some slight differences in the syntax, but they're all going to start with an if statement for a basic conditional. And so what an if statement looks like is if, parentheses, curly braces, and inside the parentheses there should be some sort of conditional that you can that will be read to say, hey, should what's in the curly braces happen? And so if we put is logged in, which is set to false, and then we say alert, you have successfully logged in, let's see what happens when we try to run that code. So I'm gonna exit out my bank, and I'm going to refresh this page. You notice nothing happens. There's an alert statement that says you have successfully logged in, but that code doesn't run, because basically the if statement reads this variable. It says if is logged in. What's the value of that variable? Well, the value of that variable is false. So this says if false. And if statements will only run what's in these curly braces, and these curly braces are called a code block. So this code block will only run if the value set inside the parentheses is true. And so if is logged in is false, so this doesn't run. If I instead switched it to true and I refresh the page, we would see the alert message. So this time we do get our alert message because is logged in is set to true. What you can also do with if statements is what's known as chain them. So if statements can be by themselves, or you can chain extra things onto them. So let's think about the is logged in situation again. So we can be logged in or we're not logged in. So we want something to happen in either of those situations. What we could do, we could add another if statement and do something like if you are not logged in. So this says, the exclamation point says, take whatever's to the right of it and turn it into the opposite. So if the variable is logged in was set to true, the exclamation point would turn it into false. And we read that as if bang, so exclamation point, we call that bang in programming. If bang is logged in, or in English we would read if not is logged in, then run the code block. So the code in this would look something like you have not logged in successfully, maybe, whatever message. And so because of the way we're written, either this one is going to run or this one's going to run. So you've successfully logged in because the value is set to true up here, or we could set this to false, and now in this bang is going to say, oh, bang is logged in, which is false. The bang turns into true, and this message is going to run. And there you go, proved it. You have not logged in successfully. However, for those of you who've done a little bit of programming, you might recognize that this is a little extraneous. And oftentimes if you have an either or situation, you're not going to write two separate if statements. You can just chain this. And so how we would chain it is with the else keyword. So if is logged in, so this is going to check if is logged in is true or false. And if it's true, alert this message. Else, alert this message. That's how you read it. If is logged in, do this, else do this. Which means if is logged in is true, this is going to run and this won't run. But if it's false, the else will automatically run, because that's the default case. What the else says is that if everything above it is true, or if everything above it is false, then the else will run. If something above the else statement is true, then there's no, the else statement won't run. I'll get the you have successfully logged in message, and the else alert code block does not run. So we don't only have to use Boolean variables. Let's take our class as an example, and let's use an example, say const final grade number, or let's see percentage, and let's say that you end up getting a 95 in my class. Really good grade. This is an A. And then we want to use code to translate the fact that you got an A. We want to translate the fact that you got a 95 into the fact that your letter grade is an A. So what we could do is we could have a letter grade and not give it a value. And now what you want to think about in a problem like this is, what's the situation in which the result I want happens? So looking at this final grade percentage, what's an A? Well, an A is a 90 or above, typically. We're just going to use simple. We're not going to use minuses or anything. So translating that, if your final grade percentage is greater than 89, because 90 is one more than 89, so we can use the greater than symbol to say, hey, let's check this number value and see if it's bigger than what's on the right. And if it is, letter grade will be equal to A. And then at the very bottom, let's do alert I received an plus letter grade plus in this class. So we can concatenate more than one thing, just as and this is a good example. In this class, I should say. Intro to Web Programming. Great. If you understand conditionals, you're well on your way to getting an A. So I received an A in Intro to Web Programming. So that's great. But now you want to think, if we want to use this code in a wide variety of situations, we need more conditionals than just an A, right? Not everybody is going to get an A. I hope everybody gets an A. But there will be people who get a B or a C, or they just don't do anything and they get a D and an F. And so that's a lot more than just an either or situation. And we have multiple conditionals to take into account. So we can't just use a simple else statement. What we can do is chain an else if and write another conditional. So we could do something like this. Oops. Let's get rid of that extra parentheses. And now our code says, if the final grade percentage is greater than 89, you get letter grade equals an A. If this is not true, JavaScript will go to the next code block. So just to make sure that this is working, if I run it again, it's still going to say I got an A. The else if will never be reached. As soon as I finish an if statement, just like with the if else case I showed you, if anything above the else is true, we don't go to the next line. We don't check the next line, because a 95 is also bigger than a 79, but we never ever even read this because we're already true here. This is kind of a little technique where you waterfall through the different cases. But if I set this to an 85, I received a B and B, whatever, in Intro to Web Programming. And so 85 is compared here, 85 greater than 89. Well, that's false. You think just logically about it. And so we go to the next line, and it says, else if 85 is greater than 79, and that's true. And so we can continue this all the way down the line. So B, C, D, F. So 69, 59, C, D. And now let's think. This is a situation where there's only a set number of cases, and if we don't get an A, if we don't get a B, if we don't get a C, and we don't get a D, ignoring the case that you could withdraw or get an incomplete or something, if I don't get any of the standard A through D grades, you have to have gotten an F, unfortunately. And so we don't really need to write a conditional for the last one. We can just change this to an else block that says, hey, if everything above me is false, then this is an F. And so we put 24. We run through every single if statement, failing them all, and reach the F. So greater than isn't the only symbol we could use. We could use greater than or equal to, and this will actually make it a little nicer in my opinion, because now we can use a flat tens place. So greater than or equal to 80, greater than or equal to 70, greater than or equal to 60. And this is equivalent to saying greater than, it's almost equivalent to saying greater than 89. It's a little nicer to read in my opinion, because you don't think of A in the course of, oh, I got more than 89. You think of the case, I got a 90 or above, that's an A. So this code will run the same way. And just to do a different case, if I plug in a 72, I got a C, right? So in addition to greater than or equal to, greater than, there's also less than. So if, let's say, let's do const birth here is equal to 20. Let's use my son's. If birth year so let's do this. if 2020, so I should say if birth year, how about this actually? So if 2020 minus birth year is less than 18, so this says, this is the current year minus the birth year, 2019. So in these parentheses, this is a little bit of order of operations. This says subtract 2019 from 2020 to get my son's age, which is, it's actually less than 1, but coming up to 1, is less than 18. We can do something like alert you are a minor, right? So if you're under 18, you're a minor. So if your birth year, if the current year minus your birth year is less than 18, for the most part, you're likely a minor. Now you could turn 18 that year, but whatever. So in this case, minor. If this is instead, 1972, the less than never runs. Or the less than runs and says, this is false, 2020 minus 1972 is much bigger than 18, so minor never runs. In addition to, so less than, greater than, just plugging in straight true or false values, we can also do comparisons of equality. So let's say we have let name 1 equals Michael, let name 2 equals Michelle, and let's say we're crazy and say, hey, are these two names the same? We can do equals 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 name 2 and alert these names are the same, else alert these names are not the same. And so obviously these names aren't going to be the same. They aren't the same. You can see them, and this if statement will fail and show we should see the else block run. These names are not the same, and if we run it, these names are not the same runs. I received a C in Intro to Web Programming. So we're not crazy. If we made them the same, so these are obviously the same name, we will get these names in the same. The if statement will run, the equality will check true, and say these names are the same. Now be careful, because values in JavaScript are case sensitive. So if I try to run these two, those names are not the same. Capital M is different from lowercase m. So you want to be careful about that when you're comparing strings or anything like that. Oftentimes, users will enter things in lowercase, so you might do something like sanitize a user input and convert it to lowercase if you're going to do some sort of comparison. So that's all I got for conditionals. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.